It feels good to be back to recording videos again. I thought I would try a bit of a different format with my last two videos and see what other people thought. I've received some positive feedback, so perhaps in the future I'll be doing more videos like those. This video will also be a bit different than my other ones. In this video, I won't be making any claims or arguments. I won't be presenting any sort of evidence, so there won't be any sources for what I say. It would just be me talking with my profile pic for most of the video. This is an introduction into a series of videos where I just recount personal experiences I've had in my life and see what you guys think about it. For me, this is almost going to be therapeutic. I'll be able to vent my frustrations, talk about personal things, and hopefully get some support from people in the audience. And also, this may provide you with some insight for why I am the way that I am and believe the things that I do. One last thing before we begin. Follow me on Twitter for political opinions as well as daily Bible quotes. In my video, Proof the Bible is the Word of God Part 1, I touched upon an experience I had in school which my teacher berated me for my beliefs for almost the entire year. I offhandedly said that it was the first time I had experienced persecution in school. And this is true, but it wasn't the only time. At my school, in my senior year, you're required to take a class on government. This idea excited me. I love to have rigorous debates about ideas and learn about different solutions to real-world issues. This is what I believed the class would be like. In reality, my prediction couldn't have been further from the truth. On our first day, I noticed that the teacher was not dressed like other teachers I had. He still wore dress pants, but they were an odd tan color, and the shirt he wore was not formal at all. It was a vertically striped button-up shirt that looked like it had been vibrant blue and solid white a long time ago, but now the colors were old and faded. But the most shocking thing I noticed was not what he was wearing, it was his face. He had a very impressive beard, like he either grew facial hair very fast or he hadn't shaved it for over a decade. And his hair had that salt and pepper gray look. The point of me telling you all this is it caught me off guard. You have to keep in mind, he looked more eccentric than the theater teacher in my school. When he reached out his hand to shake mine, I noticed how short he was. He wasn't unusually short, but about as short as a person could be before being considered a dwarf. For this video, I'm going to refer to him as Mr. X. I don't want to blast this teacher even after what happens later in the story. And I don't want people finding out where I went to high school, because they could easily find out where I live. So he introduced himself as Mr. X and told me to take a seat. I hesitated for a moment because I thought I may have accidentally gone into the wrong class. I re-looked at my schedule that I was holding in my other hand, and sure enough, his name was right next to government. So I took a seat as close to the front as I could get and began to look around the room. I saw a lot of campaign posters for Obama as well as Mitt Romney. This was only a year before the primaries began for the 2016 election. Trump hadn't even announced that he was running, and I didn't really know that much about him. I knew him a little from The Apprentice and Home Alone 2. I knew he was a billionaire, but that was about it. The last election was from 2012, so it was obvious that he'd put them up then and decided to keep them up. I'll bet if he's still teaching in my old school, that they are still there in the exact same spot they were 6 years ago. At any rate, the rest of the room was filled with other government-related posters. A poster of every president, excluding Obama, because it was probably printed before he won. A poster showing the 3 branches of government, things like this. Looking around to see if I recognized anyone, I noticed that someone who had tormented me through most of my junior year was sitting in the back of class. Once again, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to use his real name. In this story, his name will be replaced with Jack. Jack must have entered right after I sat down because there was no way I wouldn't have noticed him. He grinned a little bit as he waved at me from his desk. At this point, I was convinced that this class couldn't get any worse. If only I had known what I was in for. Soon the class was full of students, and the bell rang. The teacher closed the door, but as the teacher was walking to the front of class to begin, there was a knock at the door. Mr. X went to open the door, and a student, that I'm just going to call Bob, came fumbling through. Bob was a professional screw-up. He never made it to class on time. He never turned in his assignments on time. He smoked large amounts of marijuana daily. I know this because he bragged about it openly, and sometimes even in front of teachers. Although it was over 90 degrees outside, Bob was wearing a gray hoodie. I remember this because Bob always wore the same gray hoodie, every single day of the year. At this point, I knew none of this, but this was the first time I had seen Bob in my entire life. However, as the year continued, I would come to learn a great many things about Bob. Bob sat down at the only remaining desk near the back of the class, on the opposite side of Jack. Almost the entire class was staring at Bob because he was such a character. After he sat down, he looked around, rubbing his hands together frantically. He began to hold back laughter. This was probably a result of smoking marijuana. Smoking marijuana on the first day of school was near the bottom of irresponsible things Bob had done in his life. Mr. X started speaking and the focus shifted back to him. He reintroduced himself and asked if anyone could help him pass out papers. We received a syllabus along with a few other things, and he began telling us about himself. He talked about his family and his upbringing and a bunch of other stuff that was forgettable. But the thing that stuck in my mind was what he said next. Mr. X announced that he was a lifelong Democrat, and he had never voted for a Republican in his life. I wasn't actually terribly shocked when he said this. I could pretty much tell just by looking at him that he was a liberal. In fact, I was impressed with his forthrightness, and I gained a little bit of respect for him. Especially after he said that, in his opinion, people should tell you up front what their beliefs are instead of pretending like they're unbiased and totally objective. This was a statement I couldn't agree more with. For the first couple of days, I even believed that I had met a reasonable liberal that could possibly help me understand why so many people held a worldview that I just couldn't grapple with. A couple of days passed, and Friday had soon arrived. Near the end of class, he assigned a project that would officially begin on Monday, but we could work on it over the weekend if we wanted to. The project was to lay out your political philosophy and your opinions on 7 major political issues in America today, and put them on a poster board. We were to decorate the poster however we wanted. As he was describing the project, I became more and more excited. By the end of class, I had begun thinking about what political issues I would put on my board, and how I could decorate it with red and blue markers. Suffice it to say, I was extremely enthusiastic about the project. As soon as I got home, I asked my mom to take me to the store to get supplies. We went Sunday, after church, and I got everything I needed, along with some extra stuff that I thought would help my poster stand out. I got some patriotic stickers, I got some red, white, and blue glitter glue. I even got some paper that looked really old and dated. It had a yellowish-brown tint. It felt rough, almost coarse in your hands. So I got the supplies, or I should clarify, my mom got them for me. But at any rate, I got the supplies I needed. Monday came around and Mr. X had gotten the laptop cart, so we could research on the internet and find the things we needed. The project would be due in 1 week, so I went to work fast. I don't remember a whole lot of the specific details, but I do remember that the political opinions I covered were immigration, abortion, marijuana legalization, gun control, and the death penalty. The last one, I forget whether or not it was healthcare or welfare. Regardless, I did massive amounts of research. This is one of the reasons I'm so good at researching today. Over the course of 4 days, I had done all the research I needed and had written out all the details. That day, after school, I printed everything out using the old-looking paper and trimmed each section in such a way that it looked even more dated. I glued everything in place, not bothering to waste the glitter glue because it wouldn't have been seen. After everything was glued in, I began decorating. I placed stickers of stars and flags all over the poster. I used the glitter glue in such a way that it looked like fireworks exploding into red, white, and blue. I glued black construction paper to the poster before creating the fireworks, so it would look like the night sky, and it would allow the white glue to really pop. And at the top, I added my political philosophy. It was short and sweet. Lower taxes, less government. I thought this summed up my political philosophy quite well. I worked all night on the project, but didn't bother turning it in early. I would need to present it, so I figured I would just wait until Monday when it was due. The weekend soon ended and was Monday again. Surprisingly, nearly everyone in the class had completed the project. Even Bob had a poster. Mr. X asked if anybody wanted to volunteer, and although I was excited, I still didn't want to go first. So I didn't volunteer, but Jack did. Jack walked to the front of class and put up his poster on the whiteboard using magnets so it wouldn't fall over. His poster was good. Not as good as mine, but regardless, probably the second best in class. He started talking about how his political philosophy was about maximizing the amount of good in the world. And hindsight, it kind of reminds me of that meme about the kid who gets his bike stolen, but the total amount of happiness in the world is increased. As if that's the best way of looking at things. Anyway, he continued to talk about how he supported abortion and opposed the death penalty, making typical liberal fallacies. He said he supported legalization of marijuana to the approval of Bob, who made his approval known with a loud yes. The presentation was terrible, as were his ideas, but the class evidently did not agree with me. To my amazement, the class applauded after he finished talking. I would eventually figure out that they were just applauding after everyone's presentation, basically the equivalent of a participation trophy. A couple more terrible projects were presented, and each was met with applause from the class. After a while, the only 2 people who hadn't presented anything were me and Bob. Bob went up first, and his poster was by far the worst. He somehow managed to fold it and also roll it up, so the poster had big creases in it and it wouldn't stay open when he attempted to unroll it. To the rest of the class, these shortcomings were funny. To me, however, it wasn't funny to see someone waste their life and try half-assed at everything. When he finally managed to get it to stay open, I could see that he had drawn a giant pot leaf on top of everything, and near the center. It was crudely drawn, like he had used some old Sharpies that were running out of ink. He talked about how his political philosophy was people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they aren't hurting anyone else. For a moment I was intrigued. I thought Bob was going to be talking about libertarianism. But the next statement out of his mouth put the idea to rest almost immediately. He said that he supported single-payer healthcare. I'll give Bob this, he was ahead of everyone else. This was a year before anyone really knew communist Bernie Sanders. Obviously, government takeover of healthcare had been an idea for nearly a century, but I don't think anyone can deny that crazy Bernie made that terrible idea more mainstream. The poster looked terrible, was poorly decorated, and was incomplete. The only 3 issues he had were marijuana legalization, single-payer healthcare, and free college. But once again, it was met with great applause from the class. At this point, it no longer surprised me. Then it was finally my turn. He called my name and I walked up to the front of class. I unrolled my poster and hung it up on the whiteboard. Immediately, I could hear suppressed chuckles from the back of class. Namely, Bob and Jack. It even looked like the teacher was trying to hold back a smile. But at the time, I wouldn't have believed it. I started talking about my political philosophy and began going through the political issues. It's very much a music class. I guess hearing a different opinion was so insane that they were convinced it must be a joke. I could hear chuckles throughout the entire class now. It wasn't loud enough for it to distract from my presentation, so the teacher allowed it to continue. Finally, the torture was over, but my presentation was far from over. Mr. X decided to ask some follow-up questions. And although he didn't ask anyone else follow-up questions, I decided to answer his questions. He asked a lot of questions that weren't really questions. They were more just points he was trying to make. He was talking about how taxes are important and how sometimes government intervention is necessary. And I told him I agree with both of those statements. That is why my political philosophy wasn't no taxes, no government. He then attempted to hypocrisy burn me and told me that abortion was big government. In retaliation, I decided to throw it back at him. Isn't it hypocritical to defend murderers on death row and not innocent babies? And is it big government to outlaw murder? Instead of addressing my whole point, he honed in on the death penalty and kept saying over and over that we weren't talking about the death penalty. I tried to ask him about the other point I made about outlawing murder not being big government, but he kept cutting me off and saying the same thing over and over again. Eventually, he stopped his verbal diarrhea and asked me another question. I was annoyed that he wouldn't allow me to defend my first point, but I accepted the fact that he wouldn't listen, so I let him ask his next question. He asked a question about if I understood what gun control was. At this point, I had lost all respect for this man. He was talking to me like I was an idiot. Of course I knew what gun control was. I talked and wrote about it in great detail on my poster, but he kept insisting that I wasn't understanding what I was talking about, and it soon became very tense. Mr. X began making strange arguments and used words I had never heard before. He continued to ask more questions that were incredibly insulting, and then Jack jumped in. Jack started making points about marijuana legalization, and this caused Bob to also join in. So now I was doing 3-on-1, and I was starting to lose the argument. They continuously asked me rhetorical questions and cut me off before I could respond. I had lost total control, and they were basically just talking amongst themselves about how wrong I was. Sooner or later, the teacher said that it was time to get ready to leave, and he asked me to sit down. He thanked me for answering his questions, but at this point it was a totally empty gesture. He might as well have thanked me for being his punching bag. I sat back down at my desk, and not a single person in the class applauded. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The experience was terrible, but what happened after was the cherry on top of it all. Another week passed with uncomfortable tension between me and the rest of the class, along with the teacher. But when Monday came, I finally got my grade on the assignment. I received a 44 out of 100. I was broken at this point. It didn't surprise me that I failed the project I had so much fun with, but, I looked at what he had taken points off for, and apparently I had written down too much for each issue, as if being detailed and nuanced in your opinions is a bad thing. I had points taken off because my sources were apparently not mainstream news outlets, And if I had to give a little of my own personal opinion, I would say that I got points taken off because I dared to defy the teacher in front of the class. When I got home, I ripped up the poster in anger, and I threw the pieces away in the trash. I never told anyone that part until now. The rest of the year, a few other incidents happened that I may talk about in the future, but if I had to sum up the year in one sentence, I would say that that class was a living nightmare. Every day, the teacher would talk down to me, talk over me, grade me more harshly than the other students, and basically did his best to make my life a living hell. I hope anybody that's listening got something out of that story, and I hope that it wasn't amusement at my expense. Obviously, you can leave comments down below making fun of me, and you won't be blocked. I don't agree with blocking on principle, but I would hope that at least I get some nice comments and support. I'll probably be making a few videos with this format, so let me know what you think about it, and let me know if you like it. And if you have had any similar experiences in your life, let me know in the comments. I will read every comment and make sure to reply to let you know that I've read it. If anyone watched this far into the video, I would like to say thank you. I really appreciate your time. It means a lot to me.